Hi, I'm Kaye Wood and welcome back to Kaye's Quilting Friends. Today we're going to take a look at watercolor quilts. My guest today, Kathleen Andrews, is going to show you how you can make this quilt using the over 100 fabrics that she's chosen for you. But before we get to Kathleen, let's take a look at a machine technique that's called Pasimentary. It's an old term, and what it really means is ribbon work. Except we're going to lay our ribbon right on top of our fabric. And right here I've used it on the collar, and this is a Carib vest, and you can see how it just decorates it. And sometimes we can use that technique for quilts. So let's take a look how we do it. First of all, we need to get our pattern for the design, and we can do it one of two ways. We can use a tearaway or some way of transferring the design on the top of the fabric, or we can just lay a design underneath the fabric if we can see through it. And basically what we're going to do is take a ribbon, and I like this one because it has the picot edges on it. Those are those little tabs that stick out. But we also need, for this technique, to have a double-faced ribbon. And this one is satin, so you have the shiny side on both sides of it. Basically what we're going to do is just start stitching and keep going until we can't curve it because it's not biased. And then we twist so the back is showing, and we go again until we can't turn it. And I'm going to start in the center. I have 3 leaves here. I'm going to start in the very center because we want to do this continuously without breaking the ribbon or cutting the ribbon in between the designs. I'm going to use a straight stitch and start in the center here. And it's just a matter of stitching right down the center of the ribbon. And I'm going to lay it on the design. Don't try and turn it, because when the design turns, and we'll put our needle down, we just lift the needle, twist, and aim it in the next direction that we want it to sew, and stitch again. And until we can't turn it anymore, and then we flip it over to the other side, and sew until our design turns and our ribbon doesn't. Turn it and flip it again, and that is how we get the Pasimentary look, just like this. Let's go over now and join Kathleen and wait until you see what she's got in store for you. I'd like you to help me welcome my guest today. This is Kathleen Andrews. Hi, Kathleen. How are you?
Fine, Kay. How are you?
It's going to be fun to see how you work with these fabrics. I'm really excited to get started.
Oh, good. Well, let's get right into it then.
Okay. How do we go about starting for something like this?
Okay. With watercolor, the first 2 big things to tackle are selecting the fabrics.
Oh, that's got to be the biggest.
It is. I've found out through process of elimination that you really need 100% florals. Florals are real important, and almost everything in here has green in it, which is going to be a common thread to help connect each one of the squares to each other.
That's a good idea.
So the florals are going to be very important. The next step is going to be sorting the fabrics.
Oh. Yes.
That is generally the toughest, because you're trying to sort to value dark to the light. But what do you look at? The background, the foreground. There's so much going on in the pieces. So I've broken it down into a very simple system of sorting the fabrics.
Okay, and how is that?
Okay, what I look at first is the background. Okay,
All
the
right.
background comes first. And we're going to be sorting into 6 different groups. These first 3 groups are going to be the lightest, and they're going to be fabrics that have white or beige backgrounds. Okay, that's going to be your first clue as to where they're going to go. These all have white or beige backgrounds. These are anything else.
Oh,
Okay?
all right.
So these in the lightest areas, the very first grouping is going to be fabrics that have very few design lines or very light design lines. Getting into this next darker group, the florals will be small, but a little stronger in the color, a little more going on in the fabric. And then getting into this group number 3 is going to be your much more vibrant colors against that white background, and also the larger florals.
Okay, well that doesn't seem too hard.
Not too hard so far. Probably the most difficult one is going to be this number 5, because this is going to have a background of either black or a very dark navy blue or a very, very dark green. But even if it has bright orange in the foreground or yellow in the foreground, it's still going to go in this group number 5. So just look at the background first. If it has a black background, it's going to go here. No matter how bright the foreground is, it's going to go here. And then here is going to be anything that's not black, navy blue, or dark green, or your very, very darkest fabrics that don't have many design lines, very similar to your very lightest group. The very darkest will have very few design lines in them, but they will still be florals. Your 2 largest groups are going to be your 3s and your 5s.
Okay, so those are the fabrics you want the most of then?
Yes, yes. Well, those are going to be the ones that you're going to find the most of when you go shopping. These others, especially the very lights and the very darks, are going to be the most difficult to find. They're a little tricky.
Okay.
So once you have them all sorted out, then you can start playing with them.
All right.
Okay? And the pattern has a chart in it that tells you which group you're going to be looking in.
Oh, that's a great idea.
Where you need to go. So we're going to start in the bottom of the landscape here, and we're only going to be using group number 5 exclusively, and that's going to be in the bottom 2 rows of the landscape. What you're going to be trying to do is you're going to try to connect the squares to make the lines disappear between the squares so that it all will mush together to make the watercolor.
Mush together.
Mush together.
All right.
What you're going to look for is you'll look for edges of the squares that have a floral pattern on an edge that might connect with another edge. When you put them together, they kind of pull together. The line in between the squares disappears, and you've made a bigger floral bloom.
Does it matter that, I mean, this is a pink, this is an orange, that quilters might typically not put those 2 together? Does that matter?
You should.
You should. Oh.
You should go for
Throw
variety.
the rules out, right?
Exactly. Go for variety. It's going to create more of an illusion of depth in the pattern. So you can either connect, like you said, color to color or more value to value. When you mix up orange and pink, that's great. Here's another one that makes a nice connection. You have this edge that will match up with this edge. Yeah, and they pull together.
I notice on this one edge out here, it doesn't have any floral, so that wouldn't be a good one to bring together, would it?
Exactly. That one would be very difficult to work with. So it's like working with a jigsaw puzzle. With a jigsaw puzzle, you have these shapes on the outer edges. With the watercolor, you have your shapes on your inside that you're trying to connect together. One suggestion, when you're putting the squares down on the board, close your eyes almost all the way. When you close your eyes, it takes out a lot of the color and leaves you with the values, and it lets you see if your design lines, or if your lines between your fabric have disappeared. It's just a helpful
that's a good hint.
little trick. Once you have the bottom 2 rows put together, your very next step is going to be to do this center square. And this is a little more, this is probably your most difficult square of the piece. Most of these you're going from a group 5 to a 4 to a 3 to a 2. This one you're going from a 5 to a 3. So you're bypassing, you're bypassing one of these groups. So it's a little tougher to find. What I like to look for in this very center piece is a darker bottom and a much lighter top here, and preferably some greenery that seems to be growing up into the sky. And it helps you walk out of the bottom part of the landscape and up into the sky area. Once you have that piece in place, you can go ahead and fill in the rest of this row. and then you can work the rest of the landscape, and the pattern will tell you which group you should be looking in to find these pieces. The center area is going to be the very lightest area.
I see.
And these edges here will create a kind of a diagonal line to help your eye move a little bit, and to also create, again, an illusion of depth, so you don't have that straight across horizon line.
It's almost like a V shape, isn't it?
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So once you have that together, you're going to view it in a couple of different ways to make sure that you've done your transitions well. A couple of suggestions are that you can get your camera out. Take a look at it through your camera, and your camera will distance you from the piece without actually having to walk away from it.
Not taking a picture, just
No,
looking
just,
through the lens.
just looking through the viewfinder. Yep, and take a look at it. Another suggestion is to, if you have a dimmer switch in your living room or wherever you're working, turn the light down almost all the way so that the room is almost dark, and it's going to take the color out of your piece again, and just leave value only, and it will tell you if you have any of these sharp lines in here. There may be an area or two where you might have to rework it.
How long does it usually take your students until they're comfortable with this concept?
Session 2.
Session 2.
Usually session 2.
Session 1, if you don't get it, it's okay.
Session 1 is usually a little bit of a stretch. I like to do it in 2 sessions so that when they come back, we take a look at what's on the board, and usually within about 2 minutes, everyone has a piece that they're going to go ahead and sew together.
The eye just gets used to what to look for.
Exactly, exactly. Once they come in, we just do a little fine tuning, and they're set to go. So it's not a difficult process at all. Once you get to this point and you're ready to sew it together, we're going to be using a fusible grid, which is going to make the sewing of the piece much, much easier. What we'll do is, this fusible grid has a bumpy side and a smooth side. Bumpy side up. I have done this the wrong way, and I have fused this to a towel before.
We've all done that, yeah.
So make sure the bumpy side is up.
Okay.
And go ahead and place each one of your squares within each square on the fusible grid. And it will end up looking like this. There's the back side. Each square is within its own square on the grid, so that when you fold over, you don't have excess fabric in these folds.
Okay, they're
when
just
you're going to
butted right
sew.
up against each other.
Exactly, but not overlapping. Exactly.
Okay.
So we're going to take this over to the sewing machine when you're ready to sew. And what you'll do is, we're going to start in the bottom of the landscape in the dark area. And you're just going to fold on the dashed line. And you'll just sew a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across.
Okay.
Then fold on the next dash line. And again, sew a scant 1/4 inch seam allowance all the way across, and continue on down until you have all of your rows sewn parallel to each other. And you will be to this point here, where you have all of your rows sewn parallel to each other.
All right.
What I like to do then is, I like to take this over to the ironing board, and we can demonstrate with the iron here. We're just going to lay this right side up.
Okay.
And we're going to have the dark end on the board, and then we're just going to roll the iron across the piece. That's going to encourage the seam allowances to all go back in one direction, and it will eliminate any puckers and pleats that might have formed on the front of the piece.
Okay.
So it's a very easy way to get them to all fall in the same direction.
Looks good.
Next step is to sew in the other direction. So what we'll do is we'll fold, and it doesn't matter which side you start on. Just fold on the dash line, and again, sew your scant 1/4 inch seam allowance. Sew them all the way down parallel to each other, and you get to this point where it is all sewn together, and the fusible grid becomes part of the piece. The fusible grid does not, yes, it does not come out of the piece. It stays right in the piece. And then again, you'll just take your iron, you'll take this to the board, just run the iron over it to encourage all the seam allowances to fall in one direction, and you have your landscape.
And let's take a look at your seams, where they match. Boy, when you do it this way, it's incredible, isn't it?
Very accurate. Very accurate.
With no pinning.
No pinning.
That is great.
Yeah, very accurate, very easy, and doing it this way, your pieces don't get mixed up either. I've had it happen where I have taken pieces off the design wall, and even with a 1/4 turn of the piece,
it makes a big difference.
It makes a huge difference, and you lose your design. It's very frustrating when you see your design at the end and it's not. It's not working.
Not the same.
So this takes all of the questions out of sewing it together. makes it very easy.
All right.
Okay.
So far, so good.
Okay.
Yeah.
The next part that we're going to do is going to be the long watercolor strips. We might want to show that piece, and I'll just show you which strips we're going to be working on. We're going to do these long strips that are around here and out in this area.
Okay, they're almost like a border strip, right?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly. When you lay out your strips, you're going to be working from your 6 groups.
Okay.
Basically, like for the very longest strips, it's a 16 square strip. You'll just take 16, divide it by 6.
Okay.
And that way you know.
That doesn't quite work.
Yes, exactly. If you have an uneven division, since we have 2 groups that you have much more fabric of than the others, use the extra pieces out of your groups 3 and 5.
Oh, okay.
Okay. And on your very longest strips, you'll be using your groups 1 and 6. But when you're doing your short strips for the center area, these strips here, we will not use the groups 1 and 6. We'll just use the groups 2 through 5.
These are these pieces
Exactly.
right here.
Exactly.
Okay, now this doesn't look like that.
No, what we're going to, in this area, we wanted to build some blooms so that the eye will read this as a landscape and not just a shaded square from dark to light. When we're doing the watercolor strips,
I see. That's going to become this piece
exactly.
in the middle.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yep,
All
exactly.
right.
Yeah, so
Okay.
with doing the watercolor strips, all we're trying to do is shade from light to dark. We're not trying to build blooms or
Okay.
anything like that. We're just trying to build strips that are going to go light to dark. So once you have those strips laid out on your design wall, we're going to sew them together the same way that we did with the landscape. These can be laid out on the fusible grid. And let me take one of these pieces back. This one right here.
Okay.
You'll lay your pieces out on the fusible grid, and the same way as you did the landscape. And you're going to start in the dark end of the piece, and you'll sew all of your rows parallel going this way. Take it to your ironing board, iron it with all of your seam allowances going one way. Then you'll get your rotary cutter, and you might want to do this, Kay, and just cut these strips apart.
Oh,
now.
instead of sewing them.
You're not going to sew in the other direction like we did with the landscape. We're only going to sew in the one direction.
I see.
And then you can just go ahead and cut the strips apart. And we have a watercolor strip.
Well,
And that's all you need to do. And
Yeah.
that way again, you have the fusible to help with the sewing. You don't have to do piece to piece to piece. They can all be laid out, fused onto
so
the
you
grid.
get a whole bunch of them done at once.
Exactly. Exactly. Speed sewing.
Yes,
The
yeah.
way to go.
Okay.
And then again, with these smaller strips that you're going to do, you'll do them the same way. Basically, I would use the groups 2 through 5 on these, and just play around with it. With this one, this is a 4-piece strip, so I would use 2, 3, 4, and 5. If you had a 3-piece strip, you might want to use 5, 3, 2. Yeah, whatever.
Looks good.
Exactly, exactly. And the transitions in these areas are much more forgiving in these shorter strips. In that center area with all those diagonal lines coming in, your eye will move very quickly around in that area, and your eye will do some of the blending for you.
Well, good,
So you
good.
don't have to worry as much about the transition. So I would do the longer strips first.
All right.
Do the landscape first, the longer strips second, and then the smaller strips after that.
All right.
Okay, now that you have all of your watercolor ready, we're going to draw the central design. And we're going to draw the design on freezer paper.
Okay. Just regular freezer paper.
Just regular freezer paper that you get at the grocery store.
All right.
Freezer paper comes 18 inches wide.
Uh-huh.
So we're going to do an 18-inch square.
Makes it easy.
Exactly. So all you have to do is mark the sidelines of your square to make your 18-inch square. Then from there, we're going to measure 1.5 inch increments all the way around the square and just make a little mark along the edge of the square all the way around all 4 sides, 1.5 inches apart from each other.
Okay.
Okay. Once you have those marks done, we're going to go to the 5th increment in from this side, and we're going to take the ruler And we're going to, if you have the long ruler there, we're just going to line up this increment mark with this one.
Okay,
and just
5 from each end.
5 from each end.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay.
Exactly. And just draw a line straight across to connect those. Then we'll measure up 5 increments from the bottom, and we'll lay the ruler across, and we'll draw a line to connect those 2 increment marks.
Okay.
Now we have the center point for our circle.
Right.
Okay.
All right.
And notice that the circle is off center. It is not dead center. It is off center a little bit.
Okay, that's why you have to come 5 in from this side.
Exactly. It's
Yeah.
not right. It's
Not
not dead center. Exactly.
Makes it more interesting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So we'll get your compass out, and we'll open the arm up 3.5 inches so that you can draw a 7-inch circle on here.
Okay.
Once you have your circle drawn, then we're going to take the ruler, and we're going to connect an increment mark with the very center point of the circle,
Okay.
and then we're just going to draw a line on that. And we're just going to draw the line to the edge of the circle. We could go to the center each time, but I find with all of these lines, if you keep going into the center, you're going to lose true center after a while.
Okay, so, and you don't need it there.
Exactly. This center circle is going to be thrown away, so we don't need it. So I would just draw from the increment mark to the edge of the circle, and you're going to just do that all the way around.
Oh, great.
Line up that increment mark with the center, and then draw your line. Okay, and you'll do that all the way around, and
Okay.
make sure that you treat your corners as an increment mark. That's asked in class quite often. Is my corner? Yes, it is.
Yeah, it is.
Yes, so go ahead and draw those lines. The next step is we're going to label the design. And that way, if your cat comes by and decides to play, if your pieces get mixed up, you'll be able to put them back together.
Okay,
no
what do the
problem.
labels mean?
Okay, these numbers here are going to be your piecing order. So just
Okay.
label your design 1 through 48 all the way around.
All right.
Your next set of labels are going to be indicate either background or watercolor. Okay, now that we have the design drawn, we can cut it apart with a rotary cutter. You don't need your ruler, just go ahead and cut it apart. Each one of these templates will be applied to either the watercolor strips or the background fabric, and you'll apply them to the backside of the fabrics, and you'll cut a 1/4 inch seam allowance out around each piece, and then you'll sew them together. What I like to do is I sew each side independent of each other. I'll sew this side together, then this. Once all 4 sides are done, we'll connect them together. Then the next, where we're going next is we're going to insert the landscape into the center of the piece. You'll lay your landscape on the table, and you'll put your piece over the top. And then you can decide, you've got a couple options. You can either turn this under a 1/4 inch and then go ahead and apply it in, or you can use a bias bar and cover up that raw edge with a bias bar. Once you have the center in, you're going to add on your long watercolor strips, and you'll add them on just as you would borders onto a quilt, where you'll put them on opposite sides and then opposite sides again and again. Before you actually sew them on, though, I would lay out the long watercolor strips and take a look at the corners and make sure that your transitions are good before you actually sew them together. These strips are also made a little oversized so that you can cut them to fit your piece exactly.
Okay.
Once we have that, then we're going to be making the corners that are going to go in the upper right and left corners. We'll start with a 12-inch square of fabric.
The black.
The black, the background, and then we're going to add on watercolor strips, again as borders, opposite sides, and then we'll add on these 5-inch strips on the outer edges, again as borders, opposite sides. Once that's done, we're going to cut this on the diagonal, and you'll end up with 2 pieces like this, and we're going to sew them on to the upper right and left hand corners. When you lay this out, you're going to go ahead and sew this on. Once you sew this on, you've got 2 long bunny ears sticking out here. Cut those off flush so that when you go to put this one on, you'll have an edge.
I see.
This will line up just perfectly. After that, once you put this one on, cut this bunny ear off flush. And then the last step is to put your bottom 2 borders on down here. And again, these are going to be oversized. Let's just tuck that in. Once this is sewn on, cut that edge flush, and your piece is done.
Well, that seems easy enough. And the best part is you've coordinated all these fabrics for us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So that's all done.
Yes.
So, and that would be the hard part. Well, I want to thank you, Kathleen, for sharing these neat ideas with us. I've learned a lot, and I know my viewers have too.
Great. Thanks for having me, Kay.
Okay.
Appreciate
And
it.
be with me on the next show when I'll bring you some more quilting ideas.